Hello, everybody. Welcome to PEN at Prithvi Online. We are a fortnightly program where we interview writers working in various languages from various geographies about their books. And our sessions are free for all to attend. And we also upload the sessions to YouTube where you can catch them later at your leisure. Today, I'm very, very honored to welcome Asiya Zahoor, poet, filmmaker, and scholar based in Kashmir. She is currently a Sanford H. Taylor postdoctoral fellow at the Department of South Asian Studies, Cornell University. Her research preoccupations embrace Kashmiri literature as well as Caribbean literature. Her most recent publication is a book of poems, Serpents Under My Veil. Her concern with psycholinguistics led her to conceive the website bulbush.net. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And it is in fact her poetry collection that we'll be talking about and reading poems from today. Thank you, Asiya, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You were saying?
Yeah, I said thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I'm really glad to be here today and thankful to PEN Prithvi for this wonderful opportunity.
And it's wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful to read your poetry collection, which you kindly shared with me. I can't remember the last time I was so moved at so many different levels by not just the poems themselves, but also the way they deploy craft to make their points. And that's why I'm very excited, very bit nervous to discuss this wonderful collection. So just to ease into the session, may I ask you how Serpents Under My Veil took shape? Can you give us an idea of the internal and external climate surrounding the genesis of that collection?
The book though is a very small one, tiny, but it took shape over a certain period of time, and so these different poems were written at different points of time, and the precursors were different incidents or events. For instance, the Hawa Mahal poem, it was conceived while I was in Jaipur, and actually went to the Hawa Mahal, and looking at those windows, I kind of thought that these windows were actually not windows, but these were women. So these 999 windows were the 999 women who kind of wanted to speak to me, or maybe speak through me. So that kind of occasioned this poem, and I think these voices, these different voices, these 999 voices were muddling in my head, and crying for a release, which was possible through this poem. And then there is the surrounding the natural habitation where I am, which I am a part of, and then there are the chinar trees and the almond blossoms. So they also occupy they are the part of the landscape to which I belong as well. And then the stories of the classical literature or religious stories also fascinate me a lot. All the religions across time and space. And but if and then of course the political political upheavals and situations in Kashmir. Of course, that's undercurrent in every, because that's where I grew up and spent most of my life. So while I'm speaking to you and thinking of this, but I also think that probably there is a certain kind of historical mutability of a certain people. That kind of is the motivation behind these poems. So whether those be the women or the other unheard voices, human as well as non-human, like the chinar tree, which stands headless and still preaches resistance. So all this, I think, was an attempt to trying to give a voice to these voiceless.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of Chinars, the very first poem, I believe, or at least it's up there
Okay.
at the top, is is actually called "Story of a Grand Old Chinar, Kashmir's Plane Tree, in Love with a Young Girl." Do you think you would like to read that poem before we move to the next question?
Yeah, I would certainly have loved to. This is a longish poem though,
No
so
worries.
I'll I'll read this. And this is, as the title says, a story of a grand old chinar, Kashmir's plane tree, in love with a young girl. I've seen her eyes searching my green shade in summer when elks emerge from the forest. The girl hid in the hollow of my womb playing zuni, yearning for Yusuf. I turned green to red to yellow to brown to saffron on fire as she flicked seasons waiting for her love. Pearls of laughter playing luckered lullabies born under my branches. So many stories of childhood, now a bent woman, flesh crumpled like the first draft of a poem, discarded as an afterthought. Peeked through the windows at her father, peace be upon him, pounding with bare hands, sheepskin stretched across the belly of a long necked clay tumbaknar. I'm in Farsi, chi is what, nar is fire, chinar, chinar. What fire? Whose lilt? I, proverbial fire, chinar. Her smile softened furrows. I was a tar jealous as she kissed her lover under my branches. I stole her shadow, hid it deep within me, resolved never to give it back. Now she looks for it everywhere. Enraged, she wants to burn me down. How dare she? I am the invisible memory of the size of the trout lip lock. Am I not the link to the silk threads she tied to wooden tulips at Sufi shrines? Will not the dream threads burn down with me? Will not the aftertaste of the kisses vanish? I know I'm stalking the surreal, dreaming of an odd consummation of a young girl by a shady old chinar. I'm keeping watch at the arched paradise while toothless history snores under my shade. The roots of my history are in Kashmir. The history of Kashmir is in my roots. The sun caresses my branches. I give the sun my golden streaks. Many loiter by me. So who has carved amnesia on my bark? Leisurely notches heal. Trees don't remember their roots. Open wounds freeze sparks, stirring Zuni. To sing lol ghazals, I hum the dirge of the language whose letters were enslaved. Paper having left the tree in a peak. Jhelum flings her waves at pyres, breaks banks to drown Srinagar in the flood of the century every 3 decades. Shikarawalas, Rao Amaras Shikaras, heart-shaped oars undulate the moon. I shed memory girdling. Men can't be my saviors. My distress won't bestow daring. I await men with chainsaws to behead me. Oh, the vanity of violence. A headless chinar still says resistance. Standing tall is my dharma. Once bountiful, I'm now a registered state property. A forest swirls, wind calms mountain crags under a gunmetal sky. A stone pelts itself across the white turban peaks, across festering wounds of empilated stump after stump after stump, ricocheting on hamlets of jackboots who troop bashfully in a single file on the firmness of shriveled breasts. From tree of life, goodbye to a life. Chinar fewer, Chinar cure, Chinar, Chinar. What fire is this? Whose fire is that? Fire is.
Absolutely haunting.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And on the page, I remember it affected me very deeply reading it, and now hearing it is, it just shifts it to a different dimension without, adds a dimension to it, I must say. And in this poem, the Chinar poem and in other poems, there is this mythical vision. There is, at some places it is subtextual, at other places there are explicit references to myths, folk tales, myths. There is Medusa comes into the picture, Zulekha comes into the picture. Uh, do you see the poems as afflicted with these myths or salved by them, or something else?
Yeah, in this poem there are references to the some of the the local stories, the Zuni and the other tales, and then there are also lines which I have marked in italics
Yes,
by other poets like Derek Walcott and all. So once you, if you were to read, you would know that those are in italics in order
yes,
to
yes, yes.
kind of acknowledge the indebtedness. So, yeah, well, it reminds me of Laurent Genet, a scholar in French literature, who once said that, a work of, literature is unintelligible without intertextuality, like a speech, of a language you never learned. So it is only in relation to other texts that you understand a text. So, but there are other purposes as well. Sometimes, you use for these references simply for the sake of invocation or acknowledging the influence of these great masters. And other times it might also be a precursor to reopen a debate with history and kind of undermines the authority of a given discourse through, parody and pastiche. While it interrogates, kind of specific historical interpretation, it also sort of, aims at a unification of unity of an experience, a synthesis of cultures, and above all, for me personally, kind of it allows me to occupy that liminal space between past and present, which I find is quite liberating. So
Yes.
rather than,
Yeah, please continue. Sorry.
yeah, I said, like, to me it seems very liberating. You also connect with, you don't feel alone. There are other people who've undergone these same experiences and voice those concerns through poetry, and you are in that line and you're not alone. So yeah, it is, kind of helps me that way. It's very liberating. And there is a tradition of, even in South Asian literature, we have, like, Urdu poetry is replete with these references and allusions from different sources. And basically poetry, as we see, is performative. For instance, the ghazal form is a very performative art form because it's meant to be recited in a mushaira. And when the people in the mushaira know that a particular reference, for example, to Yusuf, to these stories, they can, foresee what the the poet is going to tell, and they kind of see themselves, they have a certain ownership to the poem, to the ghazal. And then, when the poet recites a certain line, they come up with the second line, look, by way of, some kind of knowledge that they already have. So in a way that it gives some kind of ownership to the reader as well, which I like very much. So the reader also engages and brings in their knowledge and kind of feels that they've done something with the text.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful uh, thing you said. And yes, it's like opening a door or a window, inviting the reader
Right.
or the participant in.
Right.
So I mean, that's one that is indeed what struck me about many of the poems, which is that the references, to Walcott, to folk tales, to myths. Among other things, what they did was they lifted the poems up from topicality, from a narrow kind of topicality. They lifted them into a larger body of references, a larger kind of field, which is also wonderful because many of the poems are in fact about a specific geography, at least parts of, large parts of them, which is of course Kashmir and the armed conflict, particularly the state violence that is tearing the daily fabric apart. and its effect on the mind and the body, going about its daily routine, which appears as a recurring theme in the poems. Uh, so I want to ask you, how did weaving these themes of violence, these images of violence into the poems affect you while you were writing them? What was
Mm,
that experience like?
mm. Yeah, thank you so much for engaging with the poems so sensitively. Well, violence of any kind, whether that be political violence, physical violence, or psychological one, is not an experience one could easily reconcile to. But so far as using these images in poetry and art, any art form for that matter, I'd like to believe that the whole process of externalizing these, traumas could be very cathartic at times. And that's for the writer and for the reader as well. I think, the images in art form, whether any form of art, whether poetry or using digital media or any painting or anything, so it comes filtered through the artist, because between these traumas and the reader there is this artist, his psychology, his mind, his body, through which it passes, and a lot of it gets filtered, so the gruesomeness, the rawness of that's kind of taken away. So that way I think, yeah. But it also, like, in these situations also, because when you cannot say certain things, you may, because poetry after all is a coded language, and I think, it might have at some point also developed because you didn't want to say things very openly, whether that be the any political sort of censorship, or matters which you feel do not feel comfortable sharing. For example, love. You talk about love and you see, I'm reminded of, I don't know why I'm reminded of this a poem by Rumi, in which Zuleika is using these words to describe Yusuf. She says, when she, to her, friends. So there's a group of ladies with whom she, confides, and she says that she's in love with this young man, and she, uses this coded language. And in that poem, Rumi says that when Zuleika says bread, she means Yusuf, or when she says the spice, she means Yusuf. So that coded language is, poetry has always been that, comes to rescue in such times. And so does in case of such situations where things one might not say things openly and, directly. So so it's in a way, that, kind of, this kind of situation also, brings in certain kind of, what you call, some inspiration to write. Many people are writing, right? For example, from such places, Kashmir especially, young boys and girls are writing very good stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's so wonderful that you brought up Zulekha, because you know what I'm going to request you next, which is this wonderful poem called Zulekha reads Freud to Yusuf.
Yeah.
It's another poem that blew me away. But
Thank you so much. So I've always been fascinated with this story, because in there's a mention of this in Quran, and in Quran it says, when God says to Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that, this is, today I'm going to tell you the best of the stories, and in Arabic it's called Qissasul Ahsana, the best of the stories. And then the Surah Yusuf, or the story of the Yusuf. But then there are other references also, like in the Hebrew text and other. And most important of these is Jamis, the early 16th century a Persian Afghan poet, Jami, who wrote a long a poem on this. And in most of these poems, which these retellings of Zulekha, they say that Zulekha was, she was much elder to this Prophet Yusuf, and when she was given a chance to reunion with him, her age was kind of, she was given her youth back. So in this retelling, she doesn't take that bargain, and there's a anachronism with Freud, because Yusuf again was a interpreter of dreams, and so was Freud. Zuleika reads Freud to Yusuf. Zuleika's youth shall be restored, Angel Gabriel says, fluttering in the coat of Yusuf. It has been ordained. She shall marry Yusuf, but she alone shall be old in the hereafter, where everybody will be young. I reject the bargain, Zuleika says, combing her unruly dark hair, holding the moon for a mirror. It's a pity, she says, the sexless angels don't know how a woman falls in love. Love that rules every void in the heavens, revolving celestial spheres, are but I, mad Zuleika, yearning for my Yusuf, O Yusuf. For your sake alone, my darling, I disgraced myself in front of the pagan gods. Remember Echo, woman of a few words, who fell in love with Narcissus? But then, not so beautiful nymphs, were they turned into trees? I clutched your robes like a ship in a storm. I fought drought, hunger, poverty, gave all away my jewels, royal robes, and my sight to the roguish boys who teased me with the false rumors of your arrival. Remember the fateful dream, 7 lean cows, 7 plus 7 years of loneliness? I wear age like an ornament. Why give it away? Wrinkled face, the only testament of my love for you. Zuleika holds up the interpretation of dreams, flings it at the king of dreams. She pauses, disclaims. Tell me, Yusuf, can a man interpret a woman's dream? Can a he parse a she dream? Can the masculine fathom the feminine divine? Can? Can't. Clouds discover the moon. The mirror is a fog. Gabriel cannot tell Yusuf from Zuleika, who is turning turns, play acting schizophrenia. Gabriel suspects. Zuleika stares endlessly at Yusuf, seated on the throne, her long hair reflecting the light of the 7 dead stars.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And one thing that I just now noticed when you were reading this out was that many of the poems, including perhaps this one, use scene and call and response and dialogue in a very narrative sense. Many of them are narrative poems.
Right.
Is that something that has intrigued you for long? Is that one of your because in I think the latter half of the book there are quite a few poems which are expressed as kind of deconstructed narratives with stage directions or which I found innovative. But in this case, it's a development of a scene in a sense.
Hmm.
Does that can you walk us through that a little?
Yeah, I think the reason for this is that these are basically retellings, retellings of the older stories. And when you're retelling, you're kind of giving these, looking at through different perspectives, a very the perspectives that weren't from from the perspective of the the lesser mortals, so to say, and the voiceless, who were not who did not have a proper voice in the actual story. So so when it shifts, it has to shift in the same way. They have to be given the same, they have to be given their voice. So therefore it is that character, for example, the tree in the chinar tree is speaking, the narrator, the author. So it is the shift of the authorship, which I'm trying to do. And in that case, or also in the case of the the other story, other the poem you're referring to, where where Prometheus is speaking, or in this case Zuleika is speaking, or a tree is speaking, or the almond tree or the chinar tree is speaking. So these have been the mute, what you call, what you would say that within the original text, these have been just the props. For example, the props also speak in that one poem, so that these are the two files on the table are speaking to each other. So yeah, that is the intention. And therefore, yeah, definitely there has to be a dialogue, they have to have a voice, because that is what is was the idea behind the
Absolutely,
retelling.
absolutely. And looking at things that we don't really look at, or that we miss, or that we render in our minds as mundane, even though they have their own narratives, their own significance in other lives. Which of course brings me to the next poem, where you look at this very everyday scene and you give it again a very mythical glow. I'm referring to this wonderful little poem called Rickshaw Dualities. Do you think you would like to read it?
Yes, why not? Thank you. Yeah. So I've spent much of my time also in Delhi, so maybe it's that experience. Rickshaw Dualities: centaur, half iron, half flesh, tri-wheeled Sisyphus running on human fuel, sentence to an eternity of gasps. With each pedal, he ages a lifetime, swollen feet in iron straps, bloated, snake like veins dilate with every stroke. He crisscrosses bikes, buses, Benzes, pedals his ways into the neon nights. I, a passenger, imagines him drowning in cheap liquor, sleeping under a flyover, a tryst long years ago he made with destiny.
And what absolutely evocative final lines from probably the most famous speech in Indian history,
Yeah, yes, by Joel.
the Nehru's Freedom at Midnight
Yeah.
speech. And absolutely, and it packs such a lot of power and elusive strength in such a small frame, uh, which is again uh, very rewarding as a practitioner to look at.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So some of them, from what I gather, from what I read, most of the poems are situated in Kashmir. A few are situated in Delhi. For instance, there is one about a cafe in Delhi, where the incongruousness of the situation is brought forth. I think, I don't know the name, but if you could read that one as a segue from this one, that would be wonderful.
Cafe turtle, you mean? I sip.
Yes,
Coffee.
absolutely.
Okay. I sip cold coffee in Cafe Turtle, Khan Market, New Delhi. I cuddle into a calm on a green wing chair. Daily special on the blackboard, Lebanese platter, cinnamon roll. My smartphone rings. Home. I step out to Turtle Terrace, shout, "Are you able to buy food during curfews in Kashmir?" I feel guilty. I'm sure at home they've stripped the last green from the leaves. I straighten my face, stroll back in. Two gray-haired silk saris blend kehwa and broad-minded politics. Three Fab India kurtas talk profits, their bellies prosperous. Espresso machine hisses my name. Is caffeine tickling my brain? Placard on the door. Have you got a Cafe Turtle loyalty card? I feel like a hopping clown, inverting loyalties. Less glances across the room declare my reverse solidarity. I huddle at my table, stiffen with cinnamon crumbs. I hate crummy tables. Unfold a fresh paper napkin to map my life, a farce in progress.
Wonderful. Uh, it is, it is political commentary through poetry, and the best part is that uh, it is not sloganeering. It is poetry, and it is political poetry, but it's poetry, which is something that I think a lot of people would really benefit by reading, among other things, by checking out how this collection deploys the political as the poetic. Um, uh, I remember being extremely struck by the way in which images of absolutely picturesque, scenic, natural beauty and images of quite life-threatening situations flow into each other. At times, in some poems, at least that is my reading, the violence is projected onto a tree, onto the soil, onto a lake, so that then the lake becomes infused with that. At other places, these images kind of just sit next to each other. There's wonderful natural beauty and the starkness of human nature just side by side at the same level. Uh, so for instance, in one of the poems, which also is one of my favorite poems, uh, it is, of course, what Dal Lake wants to tell me. Uh, would you please read that?
Yeah. Okay. What Dull Lake wants to tell me. Are you a quaint wooden houseboat, half afloat, or a mess of weeds pulling the boat down, or a slim concubine in a Persian miniature, leaning on a marble monument to dead love, or a trail in the sky made by a misfired shrapnel, or a vein in a fallen leaf of a chinar, or an almond blossom embroidered on a shawl for which you were sold once? Dull Lake coughs up a reply. Where in time are you? I can hardly hear the chatter of tourists, din of the boys scribbling, or a muezzin pronouncing death to the night. I play dull to match the wits of tourists who open their bellies in my flush-fitted houseboats. I laugh when sepia clouds discover snow geese in flight. I am waiting for the woman on the observatory deck to slash with her blunt sword killer weeds strangling me, but I know, even she knows, it's hopeless in Kashmir. The skies mirror Salid.
So again, that sudden one stark line of shrapnel in the sky, that is what I was talking about. And it's so many layers. There are so many layers to this poem. There are so many ways to kind of unclasp the layers of this poem. It's wonderful how you've done this in really in very with an economy of words.
Thank you.
Um,
That's very encouraging. Thank you so much.
I mean, I'm absolutely in awe. This is something that I aspire to, and you've done it extremely well in my reading. Um, and then again, also, there are these teasing allusions, like we find in another haunting poem, which is, of course, Insomniac Almond Tree Speaks.
Hmm.
Would you like to read that one?
Yeah, right, certainly. Insomniac almond tree speaks. Blooms, bringing your promises, sting like dog drank weeds. Horseflies sky my head. Women bypass me on their way to the psychiatric hospital further up the hill. Petals fall from almond trees, they sing, spreading madness all around. I can't breathe, it's all dizzily and damp. Ring the gardener, please. Tell him to plow the soil over my feet. Tell him I'm sick, I can't sway. My roots cling to the fading scent of the spring's past. Why keep me waiting so long? Please do not let me regress. Didn't I tell you my wounds will rust if I'm exposed for long to air? Dear gardener, I hope you will return soon. I'll match my memory against yours. I stayed awake all this while to shelter the story of your blossoms.
Among other things, it seems to be a lament for the way things used to be and the way they're not now, in my reading. But one thing that intrigued me specifically about this poem was that the mention of the gardener.
Mhm.
Um, and if one wishes to, one can read a spiritual or religious, amorous, or amorous reading into it.
Right.
Uh, in the last part of the poem, the G is capital. So it seems that you're referring to
Mm.
that there is a specific historical reference there. Would you care to kind of embellish that or
Yeah, all these poems are, I think, essentially love poems, even if they're very, set in a very violent or stark circumstances. But these are essentially love poems, and a gardener would be a indifferent beloved to begin with. Then it might be, as you suggested, a god as the gardener, as I think of it now, like the garden being attended by some divine, which could be God. And yeah, of course, that can be a reading into it, though. When I was, writing, I didn't, meant it to be that way. So as regards the context, I think, yeah, it's, this is. So the context of this poem, if I would say the setting, is of course the almond blossom garden, which in Kashmir is just near to the mental asylum. And over the years, I think the mental asylum has had more visitors than the garden because of the, post traumatic stress disorder and other kind of stress. So that's kind of, when it talks about, it breeds madness all around.
yeah,
And then, you can imagine the circumstances, in such circumstances, remembering, for example, is a very brave act. It might be an act which takes some kind of effort on your part. And remembering or witnessing is seen as part of some kind of dissent or resistance, or even the very act of survival in such circumstances could be an act of resistance. So yeah, so it kind of
yes, absolutely,
think that it's-
and the way that you use that setting in a and take it in a elevate it in that direction is again, and again, it's not a long poem. It's does its work in very few words. Speaking of few words, in many of the poems, there is this, as you said, I believe you used the word pastiche a little while back. There is this kind of fragmented style in many of the poems, which
Mm,
again is a major factor that creates mood and flavor that becomes part of the poem's intention. Uh, which again brings me to this question: when then do you decide that a poem is fully baked or fully done or brought to a stage that
mhm,
is is fit to be relinquished to the page? When you're
mm.
dealing with many of these poems, which are essentially intentionally fragmentary.
Oh, well, a simple and honest answer would be that I kind of lack the talent for certitude and I don't know how to end things. Maybe I'm like, can't conclude. But I think there is also the narrative actually is meant to overcome the fragmentariness of the experience. That's what it's meant to be. But I think there's also a certain strength in its depiction, as uh, in terms of form as well as in terms of content. It kind of is enabling for a writer, the way it allows the writer to kind of recover from the tyranny of quote unquote the ancient symmetries and the clarity of thought that govern much of the Western philosophy. That you know uh, for a long time, the very condition of thought is the clarity of the thought process. So I think in that way it liberates a writer also from the prison of the correct language, the mother of all shackles. So that way it helped, it works good for me to keep it fragmentary, open ended.
And that's again is adds to the power of a lot of the poems. Ranjit Hoskote adds a comment to say to you, superb, such eloquence.
Thank you so much. I'm
Uh,
really touched by his presence here. I'm really, really encouraged and also nervous because he's somebody I look up with a lot of awe, and I've indebted, so much to his scholarship as a, student of literature. So this is a very what you call a great moment for me that he is listening to me. Thank you very much. Really humbling.
uh, and then again, speaking of experimentation, there are poems like Calligraphy of Wounds, a very small prose poem, which again works on multiple layers. One of them being about the colonizer's dehumanizing gaze that turns beings into quote unquote artifacts. Um, and the setting is a cold, impersonal medical room, scientific institution where the human element is somehow obscured behind between all the measuring instruments. Do you want to read that poem?
Set. Yeah. Calligraphy of wounds. Tangled, tossed neurons, stretching, tearing, fighting against words, said, unsaid, lost and denied. Pressure of words spilling over in slow motion inside the soft tissues of my brain, inside the sequined gray matter, inside the cruel, beautiful blood clot, blood, bold and red. Colonizers makes a naksh, plated, interlaced, fringed, and squared kufi. Measurements are important, be they the pressure on the veins in decibels or the length and the breadth in cuts. Who said beauty's amplitude? The wound looks splendid in an MRI scan. I'm transformed into an artifact or a nondescript being. It's your way of keeping me alive and more.
And more, yeah. Uh, so yes, one question that perhaps I wanted to return to was, how many, typically speaking, how many drafts did you go through for some of the more complex poems?
Mhm. Uh, uh, some were like just I wrote and they were like there, and a couple of drafts was just okay. But with some poems where there are references and allusions, so I had to really check, that I, kind of are giving the proper credits and everything. Even when the first print went out, and then I realized that, one of the lines I hadn't put into, the in the end notes, and I, in the second print, because we did a second print within a few months, and then
Wonderful.
I told Anita, my publisher, that we need to do this. Oh, I'm so nervous because I haven't put this in the, and I forgot. So in the next, I think those end notes and things like that, that took a lot of time. And yes, of course, there were multiple drafts that way, whether we've done the proper, mostly in terms of style and all that. uh, yeah, well, I am kind of a person who is very nervous. So initially these were 40 poems, and then I just chose, I think, 22 or 21 poems for this, because I was really not so sure. I showed it to so I was publishing in magazines and all, but not really sure about whether I would give it a shape of a book. So I sent it to a few friends, and they kind of insisted that it should be put. So, but I was always really not too sure. Even now, I would say that there is a scope of improvement, in all these poems. And when I look back, and well, that's like also I don't, once I write, I don't really, when I look at it, I say, oh, it wasn't really so good. Maybe that's why mostly I don't go back on unless there's a reading or something. I don't go back. Even the film that I made, that short film, I watched it, and when there is a screening, I just turn on my head on the other side, and so it's done with. Otherwise, I'll find faults with it and feel bad about it.
Isn't that true of many artists, that they tend to be very critical of their own stuff? But also, I noticed that you've mentioned there are footnotes. There are the references are pointed out. Uh, which brings me to the question of the book itself, the physical book itself. Can you tell us a little bit about your publisher?
My publisher is Neeta, who is with the Yatra Books, and she was really, really Neeta Gupta, and both Neeta Gupta and Namita Gokhale. You might be knowing that Namita Gokhale is an author and a festival director, so they were very encouraging, and stood by this work, whatever, and they never interfered with anything like you change this and change that, and I think that it was very smooth, the whole process, and very encouraging. I'm really grateful.
That's wonderful, and again, congratulations on the second reprint. Most poetry books, this, especially if they're from small presses, the first run takes years, if ever, to run out. So it's a good sign, and very richly deserved that your collection got a second run. So let's bring the session. We started 10 minutes late, so let's bring the session to an end with a few more poems. What would you like to read next? Yeah, sorry.
Whatever you want me to read, I will.
So we could maybe go for Snowman.
Okay. Srinagar wears a black curfew over a white vastness. Boys turn stones into gods, hurling them up in an arc. Boom. A gun blast, and the land is childless again. I look out of the window, charcoal eyes of the snowman glare back at me. The sun has melted its shoulders, amputated its arms, eyes astern, still. A broken pan divides women from angels during curfew relaxation hour when soldiers return to the barracks. Mother bolts out for milk and bread. In that hour, I run to the snowman, feel his heaviness against my heart. Crazy, I kiss his carrot lips. They don't move. Snow turns to milk, morphing into a shriek. And like the king of serpents, the snowman melts away. For years, I followed him to the underworld, and when I found him, I wept, turning to ash. They flung me into the hot spring. I was raised as a bird in Yarvan forest. On a pine tree, I sang of loss. Habba Khatun too might have sung there, of tyrannies, agonies of love for hundreds of years. All metaphors were frozen. Now they keep falling off, leaving gaping holes in my poems.
That's fantastic. Extremely moving, imagistic work. But there are different registers there are different tones. There are a few poems which are laments, but there are a few poems which are like some parts of the Dal Lake poem, which are ironical, satirical, a little. And there are other poems like My Grandmother Spun Soft Revolutions on a Charkha, and also When the River Played Truant, which bring the narrative back to the house, to the home and hearth. Do you want to read the one about my grandfather spun soft revolutions on a charkha?
Yeah, yeah. My grandmother spun soft revolutions on a charkha, turning the fleece of Kashmir goat into cashmere. Her lullabies on a rabab put heavy guns to sleep. Her prayers soared from chimneys, wished for rivers, not cursed with myths, breasts not drilled with bullets, streets not hemmed with barbed wire, history not written in scars. She paused her thinking to boil almanacs in a samovar, inhaling embers, exhaling fire. Her passion faded like the posters on the municipal walls we ignore in the daily routine. She offered trays of mustard rice to a shrine on a mountain where the soothsayer had predicted embers will turn to ashes.
Anjali Purohit appreciates the line lullaby that put heavy guns to sleep.
Thank you, Anjali.
That was also the line that struck me the most uh, as an outsider looking in, perhaps. Uh, so, I mean, what would you like to read next? I think we can do two more poems if you're okay with that.
Yeah, certainly. Should I read a microsecond memory?
Sounds great.
Okay. A microsecond memory. Anxious facing a third eye on a tripod, freezing bits of my life, I imagine myself in his camera obscura, thinking by the rule of thirds, I should be on either side of the frame, not in the center. I was taught this once in a photography workshop. Now he has to frame the hills, a river as well, and the witchery around me. Is he using a filter to soften shadows, hide bruises on my neck? Film, Polaroid, digital. It is an age of quick fixes, no reason to wait long. Clap, clap, mirror slap. My eyes blink. His arms around my neck, zooming me in the viewfinder, and I see I am out of focus.
My word. Somehow
So,
that somehow that bit about I don't know why when I was reading the poem, that bit about the bruises kind of escaped my eye. And now when I heard it, it kind of fit the whole thing together for me.
yeah.
Uh, and for the last poem, what will be your choice?
Okay, let me. Gifts for my daughter. 29. 20. Page number. Okay, here it is. Gifts for my daughter not yet conceived. I gift you millennium of confusion in my genes. Muffled chromosomes at double X to excavate epiphanies. I sow doubt in my womb, watered with fears. I gift you my unsettled struggles, uncommitted sins, and unnoticed virtues. Unread and half read books, 3 by 2-inch laminated paper in the name of identity. I gift you a rugged map carved from cracks between divorced nations. I gift you unyielding obsessions, unexplored passions, a horoscope of cusps, and Hamlet's unfleshed line to the valley to be or not to be. That is.
It's a wonderful choice to leave us thinking as
Thank you.
we conclude the session. Uh, just a question, which is Are you working on something else as a writing project right now?
Right now, I'm working on a book, which is my PhD thesis, which is about the representations of Kashmir. So, looking at the, all the literature and other representations through traveler and their evolution through time. That's what I'm working on right now. And there were some poems that I told you I have left out. So, I'm working on that to, maybe bring it in the form of a new
Another
book for,
collection.
yeah.
And this is a tricky question. Maybe it's not even an appropriate question, so let me know if it is not. For many of us, well, for most of us anyway, who come from the mainland, there is not a tendency to pigeonhole us into any one given category. Do you find that there is a tendency, because you come from Kashmir, to expect a certain kind of theme from you, to expect a certain register, to expect a certain sensibility from you on the part of prospective or current readers?
Hmm. Yes, I think, yeah, by virtue of coming from a particular, that always happens. And, for instance, when you're clubbing, writers or even people in a certain category, like women's writing,
Yeah, yeah.
or, Dalit writing, or, say post-colonial writing. So all these terms kind of are in a way very confining, and yeah, that could be frustrating for people, because there are so many aspects to an individual. Also, it is a very colonizing sort of a tendency, to say that, these are the homogeneous masses and we are individuals. So even in, like, right, till I think in 2009 or 2010, in a library in Oxford, I saw the most of the literatures under other literatures, like the Commonwealth literatures, still, like, to this day, and that to English department. So you can you well imagine. So it was always like, we keep a certain kind of writing to a certain people and club them in it, and the more experimental and avant-garde would be for us. So that's been a tendency everywhere. We do it with people. And yeah, to say that, this is the particular, or to just to a person, not, I do not claim to be an artist. Yeah, I would say that there is some kind of restlessness which I express through different mediums. So do not claim that any kind of artistry or mastery over any art form, but as an individual also. So we are we are different at different points of time. So what I am was, an hour ago when we started talking, I'm not the same person now. After having this wonderful conversation with you, I'm a changed person. I learned a lot from you. And
Likewise, I must say.
so thank you very much. So it might,
Asya, your screen is
a
frozen.
certain group of people to say that we are, any person can, represent, 7 million people, for instance.
Yeah.
Think about, to think that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, so, well, we come to the conclusion of the session. I'm truly grateful, truly grateful to you for appearing on this session and for reading out your wonderful poetry. Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you
Um,
and so much gratitude of all of you, to Pen at Prithvi, to you, for this very engaging and wonderful and sensitive conversation, and to Ranjit sir, I mean, all my salams. That's such an encouragement, and it will stay with me for a long time. And everybody, Anjali and everybody who wrote these beautiful comments, I'm really touched and encouraged. Thank you very much for having me.
thank you, Asya. And to all those watching now and to those who will be watching later on YouTube, we are PEN Prithvi, a fortnightly online platform where we interview writers working in various languages, various geographies, various themes, various genres. Please follow us on Instagram for regular updates on the next event. And bye-bye. See you in the next session. Bye, Asiya.
Bye-bye.